Janmadyasya yaton vayaditarata sharate shabhigya swarat tene brahma hridhaya radhikavaye muyanti asuraya tejo vari mridam yata vinimayo yatra trisargo mrisha damna svena sadhana rastu kuakam satyam param dhimahi. Reva pre nava bhakti shastra vitati sanjivani swagama rambhe kamata partudhana damani vishwa pabulasini duran me marushakinopi sarasi bhavasya bhuya prabhu Shri Chaitanya Kripa Nirankushamaha Madhurya Kadambini. Hariom Tat Sat. So we're continuing discussion of Madhurya Kadambini. So we're on the Tritiya Amrita Vrishti, the third shower of nectar. This chapter deals with the topic of anarthas and their destruction. Bhakti Sarva Graha Prashamini. That's the name of the chapter. I'll show my screen here. The destruction of the anarthas, or in Sri Rupa Goswami's list, the anartha nivriti, that follows the bhajan kriya, anishtita bhajan kriya. So far, Sri Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur has talked about Shraddha, Sadhu Sangha, and anishtita bhajan kriya. So after that is the cessation of the anarthas. So that is the subject matter of this particular chapter. It's probably the longest chapter in the Madhurya Kadambini. And probably subjectively, it's the longest. It's not really a stage, but we kind of refer to it as a stage. It's the, getting over the anarthas can take quite a bit of time. So he spends quite a bit of time on the subject matter, and more specifically, elaborating on why the anarthas are not going. So you hear after so many years of people practicing bhakti and hearing so many extraordinary glories of bhakti, and still the effect is not coming. So why this is happening? So he spent some time in this particular shower elaborating on why the effect of bhakti is not being experienced by practitioners, sadhakas, despite their commitments to doing sadhana bhajan. So that is described here in this particular shower. So first he opens up with a discussion of the different categories of anarthas. I think you can see my screen here. So he says, now anartha nivritti, or cessation of unwanted elements unfavorable for bhakti, is being explained. Just an interesting point, I guess, that could be brought up here is the word anartha, the word like artha. It has many meanings, but one of the meanings of the word artha is like meaning. The meaning of words, for example, is called the artha, like padartha, the meaning of words. And the absolute reality is itself also called as paramartha, right? The supreme, you could say, meaning or reality, paramartha. So the word artha is that which has like value or intrinsic value. And anartha means not having that intrinsic value. So it means basically giving value to something that doesn't really have value. Just like, for example, one may watch television or we watch our phones all the time these days. So it doesn't have any intrinsic value for itself. And yet we're placing value in it by spending so much time on the phone. So that's called an anartha. When you're giving value to something that does not have value. This is anartha. And of course, the root cause, you can say, of anartha is the jiva's absence of awareness of his own swarup. Yaya samahita jiva, atmanam trigunatmakam paropi manyute anartam, takritam cha abhipatite. This verse, I often like to mention it, from Vyasa Samadhi, when he's describing how the jiva shakti is bewildered by the maya shakti. So he says, Yasa mohita jiva, atmanam trigunatmakam paropi manyute anartam. So he says the jiva, Yaya Samohita Jiva. The Jiva is completely deluded by Yaya, her, the Maya Shakti. What is that? What form does that bewilderment take? Well, Paropi, although the Jiva is superior to Maya Shakti, as Krishna himself says in Bhagavad Gita, that Jiva is thinking itself, Atmanam Shri Gunatmakam, is thinking itself a product of the Maya Shakti. It's thinking itself a product of the Maya Shakti. And that thinking is known as the Anartha. Okay, hold on, some guess. Can you hand me that black box?
Yeah, no.
It's what is it?
So we hold it down.
Really? I was sitting in a chair, but the chair is a little too high. So I feel like I'm far away, I need the binoculars to see. So the point I'm making. So what is anartha? That's what we're discussing. The chapter is anartha nivritti is being discussed. So what is anartha? So giving value to that which doesn't have intrinsic value is called anartha. Because artha means like the intrinsic value. So anartha means you're giving value to something that doesn't have intrinsic value. Like the phone, for example, when one can check how many hours they spend per week. So that's a practical way of saying when we're giving value to something that doesn't have value, it's called anartha. The root cause of the anartha is the absence of awareness of our swarup, our true nature. So we were discussing that verse from Bhagavatam, Yaya Samohita Jiva. So the Jiva is completely deluded by her, the Maya Shakti. And what is that delusion? It takes on the form of the Jiva, although he's superior Prakriti, as Krishna described in Gita. Para Prakriti. That superior Prakriti is thinking itself as a product of the Maya Shakti, Atmanan Shri Gunatmakam. And that thinking is called as anartha. Paropi Manute anartha. That thinking is called anartha. And takritam cha abhipadite. And then from there, I always say the fun begins. From there, all the suffering is coming. The suffering isn't due to Prakriti itself. The suffering is due to identification with Prakriti. So that is anartha. So here he says the anarthas are 4 categories. Anarthas are 4 types. Duskritota is one type. Another type is called Sukritota, Aparodhota, and Bhakti Uta. So Duskrita Uta, anarthas arising from sin. Sukriti Uta, anarthas arising from piety. Then Aparada Uta, anarthas arising from the offenses, and Bhakti Uta, anarthas arising from bhakti. So he is now going to describe each of these one after another. We'll get to some of them today. So first he describes the Duskriti Uta, anarthas arising from the sin. So he says here, Duskriti Uta anarthas means anarthas arising from the 5 kleshas described in the previous chapter. These are ignorance, material attachment, hatred, and deep entanglement in sense enjoyment. You understand? So we already heard this when discussing kleshakni, right?
Yeah.
So there are anarthas arising from avidya, asmita, raga, dvesha, vinivesh. So these give rise to sinful activities. And in this particular life, that is called as the avidya karma. So the jivas in the material world, they do avidya karma. So that means we do the activities informed by avidya or the 5 kleshas. So you get these sins in the form of the experience of these root causes of the kleshas, and you get the form of the sinful impressions which keep you distracted during bhajan. You understand? So once these anarthas, the way they affect, these anarthas affect is that you can't absorb in bhajan. That's basically the effect here. That's why it's called as anartha. You can't be absorbed because you keep getting pulled to sinful activity. Just like you want to chant japa, but then you go on the computer and do something nonsense, relatively or gravely. So that you get distracted. That is the experience of that anartha. Okay, then he describes Sukriti Uta anartha. So he says here, Sukriti Uta Unartha means intense attachment to various sense enjoyments. So when you enjoy, you get the samskara of pleasure inside the mind. Oh, this was very nice. And then those samskaras of pleasure make you want to enjoy again and again and again. So even when you do bhajan, those samskaras will come up in the mind. Like, for example, you're chanting japa, you're trying to finish your last 3 rounds, but some devotee making some cookies, and you're sitting chanting japa and you smell it. So then the samskara of pleasure gets activated during your bhajan, we're going to call it that. And the smell brings you out from your bhajan. So this is called Sukriti Uta Anartha. Mm-hmm. So you want to enjoy, you get absorbed in trying to enjoy due to the impressions of enjoyment in the past. So in that way, how you can do bhajan also. So Rupa Goswami has also told this thing, Bhukti Mukti Spriha Yava Pishachi Hidi Vartate Tava Bhakti Sukhasyatra Katam Mabhutayo Bhavet. You know this verse? No, you just got Bhakti Shastra. This verse is Nectar Devotion. Bhukti Mukti Spriya Yava means if you have the desire for Bhukti and Mukti, is like a witch, Pishachi Hriday Vartate, or a ghost hunting us. Just like sometimes a ghost, apparently they can enter inside the human body and control the person. There was a movie called like The Ghost when I was growing up, ages ago. There's a movie called Ghost with Whoopi Goldberg. Anyway, Whoopi Goldberg was playing a medium. You were telling me about the scientific experiments they're doing with the mediums. So then the ghost would enter inside her body. Yeah. And then she would speak, the ghost would speak through her body as conduit. Yeah. So Bhukti and Mukti is compared to like these ghosts or witch. They enter inside and then hunting us, speaking through us. And of course, it's not really them speaking, that is us basically in a nutshell. So Rupa Goswami is saying as long as these desires are there in the heart, that Tava Sukhasyatra, how can the happiness, Tava Bhakti Sukhasyatra, how can the happiness of bhakti enter into that heart? Right? Katama Buddheo Bhavat. How can the happiness of bhakti enter that heart? So this is called Sukriti Uta Anartha. The Anartha is coming from the piety. He says here that Pantanjali Muni, or some, and I guess by some, the Acharya said like Pantanjali Muni, he includes this Anartha within the 5 kleshas. Because that also makes sense. Because the avidya, asmita, raga, dvesha, manivesha, something that affects everyone, whether you're pious or impious. Pious people are also ignorant, and they have false ego, and they have attachment and aversion to get absorbed in the body concept of life. So some include this Sukriti Uta Anartha in that category, but somehow Sri Vishnu is also giving it a separate category, and we just to think about it. Otherwise, sometimes people think piety is very nice. Well, not some. Most people think like that, especially religious-minded people. And they're not spiritual. Although, what is religion, what is spiritual is, when you use the English words, it's always very ambiguous. I always have I had this experience in Mukta Shusha at a university, and I was distributing Bhagavad Gita, and I tried to stop this guy. And one guy was like, "I'm so spiritual. I don't need the book. You can give it to someone else."
I already know.
Yeah, I already know all this, and I'm God. I got a couple of those also. So like this distinction is made because people do get confused about the piety. They think the piety is spiritual, especially in India or religious South properly. If you just do your religious duty, then you are being, godly, therefore you're being spiritual. Anyway, so the acharyas want to make distinction that you're not spiritual just because you're pious. So, and this will come up again later on when Sri Vishnu is talking about Nishta. Okay, so these are the first 3. The first 2 categories of anarthas he's described here. Okay, now he moves on to describe the 3rd category of anartha. 3rd category of the anartha is the aparada uta anartha. The anarthas coming from aparad. So he says here, the aparad uta anartha means the anarthas that come from nam aparad. So there are anarthas that come from the nam aparad. So we have some nice verses here from our acharyas. They want to make comment about this. What is this? The difference between sin and aparad. And there's this difference between sin and aparad. Right? What is the difference between sin and aparad?
Aparad is doing things against the desire of a devotee of Krishna, displeasing them, whereas sinful activities, immoral conduct will be against that.
Yeah, that's a very good answer, actually. Aparad is doing that which is displeasing to Krishna, Guru, Vaishnava, etc., like that. And the sin is when you transgress the injunctions of the Vedas, the Shastras. And usually for those injunctions, there are prayashitas to be performed. He will say this later on, just in a couple of sentences. So he said, this is a nice statement from, I'm reading, because the acharyas are quoting this little passage from CC. In this chapter of CC, chapter 8, Adi Lila, so Kaviraj Goswami is he's making a comparison actually between the names of Krishna and the names of Mahaprabhu and Nitai. So you can do a lot of offense to Radha Krishna Nam, but to or Nitai Nam, you cannot do any offense. So he's making some comparison there. So this is coming up in that, and we're not going to read the whole little passage, but we're going to read a few verses that pertain to the point that's being made about the distinction between aparad and sin. So first he says here, Eka Krishna Name Kare Sarva Papanash Premera Karana Bhakti Karane Prakash. It'd be nice to sing these things like Guru Govinda Maharaj, but you don't have, so it doesn't have the same flow. So here it says, simply by chanting the Hare Krishna mantra without offenses, Sarva Papanash, all the sins can be destroyed. Okay? Thus the pure devotional service, which is the cause of pure love of God, becomes manifest. Bhakti Karena Prakash. So then the bhakti comes up from chanting Krishna Nam, and then after that you get prema. That sounds very nice, right? Yeah, from Eka Krishna Nam. That is what's described in Ajamil Lila, right? Ajamil developed bhakti from the first time he chanted Narayan's name. First time. We always say like when he chanted at the time of death. But actually from the first time he chanted Narayan's name, he got bhakti. And then every time he chanted Narayan's name, after that, the bhakti was just increasing. That's why he was able to chant Narayan's name at the end of his life. You understand? So it's like, well, he chanted Narayan's name at the end? No, in the beginning, his son was born, he named Narayana somehow or other. I hear some story that his wife got sadhu sangha. Do you hear this?
No.
I don't know from where this is coming, but I've asked around for years. So I've heard it from a couple of different places, but no pramanam, like where precisely. Apparently, wife got sadhu sangha while Ajamil was out sinning and grinning. The sadhus came over and they said, she treated them very nicely. So they said, you're pregnant, you should name your child as Narayan. And so she named like that. Anyway, from where that is coming, anyway, I'm tempted to believe it because otherwise, how can bhakti come in a person's life? Yeah. Yeah, I'm tempted to believe this. I don't know from where it's coming, but it must be accepted.
But he was also trained, as a youngster.
So but he was a smarter Brahmana. So there's a huge commentary about that. We're not getting into too much of that discussion here. Okay. It's a great, actually, maybe later after this, we can read that purport of Sri Vishwanath Thakur. Yeah, but he was smarter Brahmana. He wasn't devotee. But we have to accept, even though this story, I don't know where it can be confirmed, and we could accept it because in Bhakti Sandarbha, when Jiva Goswami is establishing that bhaktas are the source of bhakti, so they quote one example of Pingala. So in the pastime with Pingala, it's not mentioned that she got sadhu sangha.
Yeah, she just standing there.
But Jiva Goswami says we have to imply that she got sadhu sangha. Otherwise, that devotional move would not have been able to.
Just thinking about herself, that take shot of the Lars. Wow, pretty good.
Yeah. So we must assume that
prostitutes should turn into a devotee.
So we must assume. So also with this Ajamil story. So Ekanam, just from the first time he chanted Narayan's name, he got bhakti. Then all the names after that, he developed his bhakti, and all his avidya, his bija, his papa all got destroyed, even from that first Krishna Nam. Anyway, so long commentaries there from Sri Vishwanath. So after that, you get bhakti. That's what it's saying. You get bhakti, and after that, you get prema. So this is your experience also? Is that from 8 Krishna Nam? We're doing so many Krishna Nam in a day. How many Krishna Nam are you doing a day? If you get to the 16 round mark, how many names is that? 1,600? A A lot.
25,000.
25,000?
Yeah.
25,000 names in a day.
Yeah.
And you're getting the prema? Yes. You shouldn't say like that. So it's primero udai. You know why you shouldn't say like that? So the next verse is telling why you shouldn't say. Primero udaya hai, primero vikar, sweda kampu pulakade, gagadhashudhar. So all these symptoms should be coming in your body. When one is transcendental loving service to the Lord is manifest, primero udai, so when prema comes, then there's the transformations of prema vikara. What are they?
Sarcasm.
It generates transformation in the body, such as perspiration, trembling, throbbing of the heart, faltering in the voice, and tears in the eyes. Tears in the eyes. Any tears coming up? Huh?
The tears may come, but the heart is not as long as the stone.
Oh, yes, that's a good verse. We also quote this verse. Okay, so next verse he says, so Anya Yase Bhavakshay Krishna Sevan Eka Krishna Namera Pale Pati Etadan. So as a result of chanting the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, one makes such great advancement in spiritual life that simultaneously his material existence terminates and receives love of Godhead. Bhavakshay, destruction of the Bhava material world, and Krishna Sevan. You get service of Krishna, you serve Krishna inside and outside. Just like when, who is that? I was Gaur Kishore Das Babaji, he would chant name. He said, if no spurti come, his japa was unsuccessful. Doris Japamala, I didn't see Krishna part. We also don't see Krishna in the heart, and that's all right. No problem. So the holy name of Krishna is so powerful that by chanting one name, one very easily achieves all these transcendental riches. Just by chanting one Krishna name. So then he makes a conclusion here. Hena Krishna nama yadi lai bhabubhar, tabu yadi prema nahe ashudhar. If one chants the holy name of the Lord again and again, and yet his love for the Supreme Lord does not develop and tears do not appear in the eyes, tabe jani aparade tahete puchura, Krishna nama bija tahe nakare ankura. It is evident that because of his offenses in chanting, the seed of the holy name of Krishna does not sprout. So, and then you quoted the verse, Tarash Masaram Hidayapatedam, Agrihyamanai Harinamadeya, Yatavi, what?
Navikritato yatavikaro.
Yavikriyetato, Yadavikaro, Netrejala, Rusho Raheshu Harsha. So, our heart must be like stone, and chanting Harinam with concentration still, no transformation happening. And transformation means Bhav Bhakti for the acharyas. So I think sometimes like at the japa retreats, people were like, I do the 64 round day and they would come for it. And I think I was really starting to feel transformation means Bhav Bhakti. According to all the Acharya commentary at least. So here the difference between Sena and Aparada is mentioned in this passage. That's why this is quoted by Acharyas. Because they're saying by one Krishna, all the sin is destroyed.
Yeah.
So that means sin is not really a problem. And in Vaishnavism, sin is not really considered that big of a deal. Although in our religious orientation towards spiritual life, we do tend to make more of a deal of sin because, community dynamics and all that, you have to make kind of a fuss about sins.
Well, also many times sins are connected with offenses too.
That's coming up. He's going to bring this point up. But just as a general rule,
sure,
sin is not really that, so devotees sometimes getting melancholy because of the sin. And that is good for their bhakti. We already heard this from Sri Vishnu when he discussed Shraddha.
Yeah.
When impressions of enjoyment come up, or more than impressions, actions come up, so then the devotee will feel repentant, and that humility actually nourishes his bhakti. So even then he doesn't become the loser. Even if some transgression is there, he's still not the loser because he repents and he feels humble. Look at my condition. So sin is not considered a big deal, but the aparad is considered very big deal. So Srila Gauravananda Maharaj, I forget the language he uses, but he says, he gives some term for it in Sanskrit, but he says sin is like accumulation of dust. So if dust accumulates very easily, you can wipe it away. But the aparad is like a thunderbolt hitting the mountain. So leaving some scar. Sins are of the body, basically.
Mm.
You can say aparad or sins of the soul. That's like a poetic way. I've heard it said like that question. I like that sort of poetic way of thinking because it affects the soul. The aparad affects the soul and his ability to receive grace in the form of bhakti and the fruits of bhakti. So it's like the sin of the soul. Sins of the body are not, you should not do. Vaishnavas are not attracted to piety or sin. So you cannot say like, oh, because sin is not a big deal, then I will go on sinning. Then you're not a devotee. Or you're not a very high devotee, like Prabhupada writes in the Apicha Sudarachara verse. Because the devotee is not attracted to piety or sin. So it's not like he will do. Apicha Sudarachara, even if, so Jiva Goswami says that even if, means that he is not doing generally. Somehow there's some circumstance or it may come up. But even if, means he's not doing. So you cannot take this as an excuse to do sin. But still, if it comes up, it's like sin on the body. The body is temporary, so the sin is also very temporary. The reaction is also very temporary. It's not that big of a deal. But the aparad is sin of the soul. So in this way, they discuss the distinction between sin and aparad. Okay, so aparad here means the non-aparad, the 10 offenses to the holy name. So then it goes on to say, here, several aparads have not been considered. For intelligent people, have not been considered. So you know the seva aparads are there. They're like literally 128 plus. Have you read the Nectar? As it comes in like chapter 8, right? Yeah. I think chapter 8 where the non-aparad, seva aparads discussed. And Sri Jiva Goswami also quoting and Prabhupada also following that. They quote this whole long list from like Varaha Purana and some other Purana. The only one I can remember is don't step into the temple with the shoes on. Don't dress in blue and red like in the royal colors, the colors of royalty. No offering obeisances on one hand. Yeah. I don't know why that one always like no farting. Yeah. No passing air in the temple room. No belching. Even this one really got me up. When you're sitting on the vyasana, when you're sitting in the temple, your feet should be covered. Yeah. And I remember finding so much fault with the boys who would give class in the vyasana. No, they would like sit on the vyasana and the dhoti would be covering and then they would put
the feet out and they would play with the feet too. I was like, what's happening? Why are they spelling their feet right out of class?
Picking your toe now. Hare Krishna.
And then they're telling the Bhagavatam that same. Yeah. It's like, wow, man, I guess that's transcendental, I guess.
Sorry, Siddhar is now, so he's doing his thing with me where he makes me laugh every statement he says. Yeah, so I used to find, but those are literally 5 out of a list of 128.
Yeah. No mudras.
No mudras. Yeah. That's one of them. Okay, yeah. So many seva aparads you can do. So he says aparad uta. Anartha means the aparads that come from non-aparad, not from seva aparad. And he gives a reason for this. He says for intelligent people, vivekinaha. Usually the effects of seva aparad are nullified by chanting the holy name, reciting stutis, and by constant engagement in the service of the Lord. Seva aparads are thus unable to appear. But they're always doing bhajan basically. So the seva aparads are nullified by that bhajan. Okay, so then he brings up this point just in case someone is thinking, all right, cool. If one is, however, careless about seva aparads, knowing that by chanting and reciting prayer, seva aparads can be nullified, then all the seva aparads turn into non-aparads. Yeah. Thus, Shastra says, Namno Bhala Yasya Hi Papa Bhuti.
I do not want to read the seva aparads.
I know, but it's too late. You already read Nectar Devotion.
I only remember like 7 of them.
Yeah. So. Kamini says on the strength of Nam is one of the Nam aparads. So what is this Papa Buddhi? He will also explain what is this Papa Buddhi, because he's going to make another point. In this verse, Nam also refers to other devotional practices. So because it says Nam no Bhala Yasihi Papa Buddhi. So the word Nam is representative of all the different angas of bhakti. And so even Dharma Shastras related to the codes of karma yoga also say that if one commits sins on the strength of atonement, thinking that it can destroy the evil effects of sins, then those sins become more intense rather than being destroyed. So even in karma shastras, this thing is there. So That's because, so he's saying that you cannot go into it with thinking, oh, anyway, I'm chanting Hare Krishna, so it doesn't matter if I. So that mentality is Papa Buddhi. So you get a heavy reaction for that. That heavy reaction means na-aparad, and the result of na-aparad is no prema, no all these chances, no bhavakshaya, none of these chances or riches you can get if that is coming. If you're doing like that. Okay, so now he brings up a sort of related point. What about you intentionally neglecting to do some of the angas of bhakti? So there's transgressing like seva, doing seva aparad on purpose, thinking I'll nullify. So that is an aparad.
Yeah.
But what if you intentionally neglect to do some of the angas of bhakti? Is that also not aparad? Because there's so many angas of bhakti also. Of course, there's the main ones, Bhajanera, Madhya, Sheshta, Navavidha Bhakti. The main ones is Navavidha Bhakti, but that Navavidha Bhakti has been expanded to 64 angas. And even that 64 angas is a small list.
Yeah.
I think Srila Rupa Goswami, he said, I've taken the main angas from Hari Bhakti Vilas. Well, Hari Bhakti Vilas, I'm even scared to look at what is the whole list. Must be a lot there. So many angas are there. So what if you intentionally neglect some of them? Is that na-aparad? That's a good question. So if you purposely transgress some of them, that is an aparad. Thinking, oh, anyway, I'll chant Hare Krishnas. But what if you purposely neglect?
What do you mean neglect? You don't have
There's so
time
many
for it?
angas there.
Well, I'm a limited
Yeah,
person.
not performing.
Okay.
Not performing.
I mean, it's not like there's an opportunity for it. I say, no, I don't want to do it. Or versus,
No, but it could be that also. You're not performing like intentional, like there's opportunity.
Yeah.
But you say, I'll not do this because anyway, I'm doing Shravan, let's say,
Yeah.
or some.
Well, there's in active devotion mentioned, and at least for the Navavidha Bhakti, that whether you can perfect 3 of them, 4 of them, or 1.
Yeah, that's for Navavidha Bhakti. So this thing comes up actually in the BRS also, corresponding to chapter 5 of Nectar Devotion. Anyway, where it says that, well, Srila Rupa Goswami wants to make the point that Varnashram is not an Anga Bhakti. He wants to discuss with the Angas of Bhakti. So he wants to say that Varnashram is not an Anga Bhakti. So then he says, if you neglect Varnashram, there are no fault. And those who know the secret of Vaishnava Shastra knows this. He makes this particular point. But he says if someone doesn't follow if someone follows the main Angas of Bhakti, but he's not following some of the other ones that are considered like secondary, then that is not considered as a fault. And the footnote is coming, so then what are the main Angas of Bhakti? So Navavidha Bhakti, or the 5 most potent Angas of Bhakti, and also the first 20 Angas of Bhakti. They're like the doorway Angas, especially the first 3, Guru Padashraya and receiving Diksha and Shiksha from Guru and Vishambena Guru Seva. These are like the main Angas of Bhakti. But then there are other ones like putting a tilak on, and there's so many there mentioned. They're kind of considered like secondary Angas. So you're not at fault if those are neglected. So basically, same point is kind of being echoed here. So he says, or he quotes from Shastra, O Uddhava, from the very beginning of this religion, even if it is not yet completed, there is not even the slightest loss. Simply by chanting the 10-syllable mantra, this is another quote, gives perfection. On the strength of these verses, someone may ask whether non-performance or improper performance of devotional parts produces na-aparad or not. So that's a good question. Because in Karma Shastra, this is true. Right? That's why the verses there, Nehapi krama nashosti pratavaya navitite swapam apyasya dharmasya tarete maratobaya. Krishna wants to give encouragement to Arjuna for this Buddhi Yoga, which in the context there refers to, well, according to Sri Vaishnava, refers to Bhakti Yoga. Or Buddhi Yoga can mean Karma Yoga, honestly, also in context there. Yeah, so does Bhakti Vibhushana. But
that's the trend of the Gita.
Yeah, that's the trend, because that is the theme of the first 6 chapters of Bhagavad Gita is Buddhi Yoga. But Sri Vaishnava gives some other explanation that's very nice also. He said, I mean Bhakti Yoga. In any case, because the Dami Buddhi Yogam Tam Yanama Pyantate, Buddhi Yoga can also refer to like the divine enlightenment given by Satatam, Anyway, he gives some other explanation there. It's also very nice. So in any case, Buddhi Yoga, we'll just use the word Buddhi Yoga. You want to take it, Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, whatever. In either case, he's giving inspiration, Krishna, is saying that even if there is no loss or diminution, that's how we hear it translated, right? So in a karma path, if you don't complete the thing to the end, then it's a loss. And if you do it with discrepancy, then it's diminished, and you might actually get sin from improper performance. So is that also there for bhakti? Someone's gonna ask the question, is that also, what if I don't carry it all the way to the end? Like Arjuna's question is similar at the end of chapter 6, right? Where he says, like a riven cloud, you know, I gave up path of karma and I went for the Buddha yoga, but I didn't get success there either. So do I not become like a riven cloud? Also, Narada Muni is addressing this in his teachings to Vyasa Muni when he said, Taktva sadharma charana bhuja hare vajana papo. You remember this first? You know, the first line you quote and then you give translation. That way you sound like authoritative. That's very secret. If you want to sprinkle your presentation with authority, just at least the first line you quote, and you just go Taktva sadharma charana bhuja hare, etc. And then you big words. Yeah, bhajana papo, not to tet yado anyway, etc. The idea here, he's saying that if you give up your swadharma, taktva dharma, you worship Hari's lotus feet, you do his bhajan, but you are not perfected in the bhajan also, then there's no loss because you got bhakti vasana. That's basically the import there. So there is no loss. That bhakti vasana is the most sacred thing in this whole entire existence, basically. But if you don't do bhakti and you do your dharma very nicely, what is the gain? That was verses there. So this question is, people will make this comparison because bhakti is also having actions to it. So karma also has actions. So they think like this, that bhakti is a type of karma. So they'll make this question that's coming up in this context there, that what if I don't complete bhakti, or what if there's some discrepancy in performance? So he's saying here, the answer is no. So no, there's no loss if it's not completed. Krishna's already said this in Bhagavad Gita also. Also, what is that? Nahi kalyana krit kashchit durgatam tatakachati. Also in this kalyana krit. Yeah, this is 640 Bhagavad Gita. See, I haven't quoted these verses in so long. They're only existing as like latent impressions getting activated in the course of the conversation. Nahi kalyana krit kashchit durgatam tatakachati. On this kalyana, on this path of auspiciousness, this work of yoga, which is auspicious, there's no, you'll not be overcome by evil, is how Prabhupada translates it. Durgatam tatakachati. So he's saying, no, there won't be any loss. No, if there's discrepancy, there won't be any destruction. That's what it does. So in this verse, one who commits sins on the strength of the holy name, the word papa buddhi means the intentional committing of sins. So you know, like you're not supposed to do it, and then you do it and say, I'll chant Hare Krishna later. So that is non-aparad. Acts that are condemned by the scriptures and that require atonement are known as sins. That's why you gave a very good definition of sin. He's also telling us here. And the path of karma, imperfect performance of karma is condemned. I think the classic example given is Twashta in the Richard Sura Lila. So he made some wrong syllable he chanted because of Vedic rights. Intonation. The intonation was wrong.
Yeah, he didn't say saw, he said saw.
Yeah, dude, that's heavy. The intonation.
The meaning of the samasya.
Yeah, wow. So he got opposite result than what he wanted. So that is path of karma is like that. Even material karma, let's speak of the Vedic, right? Even material karma is like that. It's the slightest discrepancy. Just like if you think of like people who are like in relationship, for example, everything is going good, but like, why did you look at me that way?
That's it.
The slightest discrepancy, and then you get opposite result. You're going on a trip to enjoy, and on the trip you just happen to look in a way that they didn't appreciate. Slight discrepancy. Then they will argue for the rest of the trip about why you look at me that way.
I didn't mean anything. Bullshit.
Yeah.
You know what you meant.
You know what you meant. You know what you said. You know what you did. So that's how material life is like this, as a general rule.
Very strict.
Very strict. Exactly, it's very strict.
I've seen the spaceship Columbia, which got
Spaceship Columbia. Okay, what is this?
Destroyed. Like there were like 6 astronauts coming down.
Oh yeah.
And there was like some like.
Was this recent?
No, this was
10 years ago.
10 years ago. Spaceship Columbia. Okay, so 10 astronauts were killed.
Yeah,
okay.
the USS, not 10, like 5 or 6 that were killed.
Okay.
The problem was that there was like some like one lid was like forgot to close, and
One lid was forgot to close.
and then that lid caused like further aggravation while coming into the Earth's orbit, and when they're coming down, the whole thing exploded.
Wow, one lid was left open. It's funny, just a little lid left open, but it coming back into the
Billions of
orbit.
dollars and 6 people died.
Billions of dollars lost, 6 people died. Material nature, very strict.
Yeah.
You forgot to close the lid.
And these people-
Yeah, you have to suffer the consequences. So bhakti is a little bit more gracious than that, more generous than this. But on the devotional path, imperfect performance of any devotional part is neither condemned, nor is there possibility of any offense. Okay, so he wants to quote a pramanam for this. So I only usually have 3 minutes, but we're gonna do this. We're gonna cover this. So I will go a little bit over time. So he says this in the Srimad Bhagavatam. He quotes 2 verses. Quote, even illiterate persons can easily come to know the supreme absolute truth by adopting the process spoken by the Lord. This process is known as Bhagavat Dharma. Okay, so even the Avidusham Vidhi Bhagavatan Hitan, even people who are ignorant, they can do bhakti. So it's made of the bhakti for everyone. That's the verse. That which is given by Bhagavan is meant for everyone. So other munis and rishis, they give other paths that aren't meant for everyone. They're according to Adhikar. So this is the commentators giving us expansion on this. So the Gyan Shastras, you need certain Adhikar for that. Yoga Shastras, you need certain Adhikar for that. Karma Shastras also, you need certain Adhikar for that. So not given for everyone, but that which is given by the Lord is meant for everyone. Even ignorant people can do what is given by the Lord, that is Bhagavad Dharma, okay? Then this verse, this kind of famous verse, this process is known as Bhagavad Dharma, or the path of devotional service. By accepting this path, a person is never bewildered. Yan astaya naro rajan na pramadhyate karichit. Okay, even if he closes his eyes and runs, he never stumbles or falls down.
Yeah.
Such a nice verse, huh? Davani milya bha netre naskame napatetiha. Even if he closes his eyes and runs, he never stumbles or falls down. So Sri Vishnu wants to explain what this means. And it's connected to the previous point he was making about the generous nature of bhakti. So he says in this verse, the word namilia refers to the performer of a specific activity. Namilia means that one closes his eyes. Dhamma means he is moving quickly by placing his feet in an unusual overstepping way. Still, he does not stumble or fall. So the idea here is that, let me read on. It is understood from this verse that if a person takes shelter of the devotional path, but he knowingly leaps over some secondary devotional parts, though practicing the main devotional parts such as Shravan, Kirtan, Smarana, and so forth, he never fails to get the fruits of bhakti, nor is he ever faulted. So closing the eyes here means he's consciously choosing to not do something. It's a type of activity. So many activities are there, and he's closing his eyes to certain activities. And this word dhamvan, like running, means you're overstepping a little bit. You know, it's not a natural step, it's a little bit further step. And this also apparently is intended to indicate like eagerness. He has some eagerness for bhajan. And so there's so many little things that can be done, but he's overskipping that. He's closing his eyes to that because there's eagerness for bhajan. He's doing extra rounds, extra shravan. He's really absorbing himself in the main angas. And so he's not allowing himself to get like worked up over all the little things that might come up, which might be secondary, smaller angas. I don't know, no examples where it's specifically given. So I can't say exactly what would, I'm trying to think of a scenario where that might come up. You know, like, I don't know, like attending a festival, for example.
As you say, sometimes you see people stay back from like in the temple, the morning program, because they genuinely want to chant extra rounds or something like that. Yeah,
that's a good example, not going in the morning program. And
like you also mentioned when you were serving the spiritual master, you didn't care about how many rounds you were chanting. You're like, your focus like, hey,
that was a glorification of Guru Seva in that context from that commentary.
That's this Guru Vishwambhena.
That Guru Vishwambhena Seva. So this is the meaning of closing the eyes here. So he's conscious of those angas. It's not that he's unconscious, but he has eagerness for bhajan. And so he's just closing his eyes to the performance there. It means he's not doing that because there's eagerness for bhajan. He's doing the main angas of bhakti. So there's no question of him being destroyed, basically, or some discrepancy there. Even though he's consciously neglecting to perform angas of bhakti, it's not an aparat. Whereas in karma marg, etc., that would be considered a huge transgression.
Yeah.
And you get reaction for that. So bhakti is different than that.
What's the verse number for that one?
This is 11th canto, chapter 2, verse 34 and 35. 35 is this particular verse. It's a very nice verse. Some people explain it as being ignorant, so Sri Vishnu wants to comment on that. So Nimilanam cannot be explained as ignorant of Shruti or Smriti because it cannot contradict the real meaning. So some people want to say that it just means they're ignorant of Shruti and Smriti, but he's saying he's not agreeing to that.
That's a nice comment.
Yeah, he's not agreeing to that. It's not ignorance of it. They're just, they have the ability to see. They're also seeing, but they're closing their eyes. That's good. So he's not agreeing to this, that it means they have ignorance of the Shastra.
That's interesting. It's better to know it and neglect it, like
Consciously, right?
Than to never know it at all.
Right, which is a sort of an argument that we just heard like 10 minutes ago. So man, I shouldn't have read. No, you read also, but you consciously neglect for a higher principle. Just like in one place Krishna says, 335 Bhagavad Gita, or twice he says it in the Gita actually, that better to do your duty imperfectly than to do someone else's duty perfectly, right? Destruction is there for those who do others. Dharma. But then later on he says, Sarva Dharma Yagya Mame Kamshak Nambuja, you give up all the Dharma and just worship me exclusively. So then you give up all the other Dharma, you worship Krishna. So he said, well, you gave up the Dharma. No, because now I'm following higher thing was told. So it's like that with this bhakti also. Yeah. There's gradation between things. That's why Maharaj was saying, Bhajanera Madhya Shresha Navavida Bhakti. Out of all the types of bhajan, there's so many forms it can take. But he says this Navavida Bhakti is best. Out of Navavida Bhakti, 3 angas are best. Shravan, Kirtan, Smarna. Out of these 3, Nam Sankirtan is best. This is described in 2nd Canto, chapter 1, verses 5 and 11. So out of the 9 angas, those 3 are considered like the kings, chief ones, Shravan, Kirtan, Smarna, but then 2, 1, 11. Out of those 3, 2, 1, 11 said Nam Sankirtan is highest, right? So their gradation is there also. So someone is taking a higher thing, so then the lower things may not always get followed. There is no discrepancy there, that's what he's saying. So Dhamma and Nimilana cannot mean neglecting the 32 kinds of seva aparat, since it is already said, by taking shelter of the process spoken by the Lord. Seva aparats are forbidden by the verses. It is offensive, quote, it is offensive to enter the temple of the Lord riding on a vehicle wearing shoes. That's one of the seva aparats. So the Shastras condemn persons who deliberately commit seva aparats as a 2-legged animal who commits offenses at Sri Hari's lotus feet. So it's not that because you are consciously neglecting to perform certain angas that you consciously transgress other angas again. It's not that now I can walk into the temple room with my shoes on. No, because they've already taken shelter of the Lord. That means they're not doing seva aparat. They're going to be doing seva to the deity, to Krishna also. So they're just consciously neglecting certain things. It doesn't mean transgressing the things that they're aware of. Okay, so that's a kind of sidebar conversation. Continue. This is all discussed in Aparada, Uta, Anartha. So the reason he's going to give into this because the Aparada is the main problem. Yeah. So this is going to become a very expansive section. And then he'll get to Bhakti, Uta, Anartha. There's this Aparada section. Like our spiritual practice, this part is not getting over. The Middle East of spiritual practice. He said that. So he says his last thing here. So non-aparats may have been committed unconsciously long ago or recently, but they are inferred by their effects. So you may not know what aparat you have done, but it can be inferred by the effects. So there are 5 effects mentioned by Jiva Goswami of aparat. You know the 5 effects? I looked it up again.
What is that?
First one is Kautilya.
I'm an example of it.
Yeah, cheating, crookedness. Yeah, crookedness is the first one.
One is a lack of taste for bhajan.
Yes. Here I noted them down here. So Kautilya is the first one, like crookedness. So
you're showing one thing outside and inside another thing going on. So, but you can't make advancement if you're crooked. If you're fallen, you can make tons of advancement. Like being fallen is, and in the Kali Yuga, almost it's like a benediction in a sense. I mean, it's also the starting point.
Yeah.
Without starting, the
But
beginning
there's
of the starting point.
special place of realizing you're fallen.
Yeah,
and being fallen.
Yeah, exactly. The special space of right being fallen and realizing that you're in a good place.
Yeah.
If you're a crooked person, so Srila Gauranga Maharaj used to often say that Mahaprabhu is the savior of the fallen, not the savior of the crooked. Crooked example in Mahaprabhu Leela is Ramchandra Puri. Such a crooked fellow he was. He would invite sadhus and want to serve them. He said, take more, please, take more. He would serve them more, and then they would keep eating, and he would insist, take more. And then when they ate, he said, what is this nonsense? You're supposed to be sannyasis. You are overeating with nonsense.
Ants where you were eating.
So why he become like that? Such crooked fellow he became because of his offense to his guru. He committed guru aparadh, so he got this problem. Such a crooked
But he
person.
also mentioned he's also an attendant to see the Lord.
Okay, we're not getting into that. One point is trying to be made. Yeah, one point is being made. Bring up some other. Okay, so this is the first one. The second one, ashraddha. You become faithless. Although you're hearing all these things, you don't accept anymore. You don't believe, or so many doubts start to erode.
Actually, I've seen some devotees who have made a lot of offenses. Although they were like they had a lot of faith previously, and they will remember sections of Bhagavatam, Bhagavad Gita, and now they don't care.
Yeah.
They don't care at all.
Yeah, this is
And it's like wow.
Lack of taste.
So this is one of the effects of the offenses. You see that Shraddha is waning,
Yeah.
better start crying. Just like now we were telling Prabhupada saying we should learn this technique. That if you can't cry, you should cry that you can't cry. And we can just say, what if I can't cry that I can't cry? You should cry that you can't cry that you can't cry. And it becomes like a big fun game. But if you see your Shraddha is going down, you better
Don't be laughing.
it ain't funny. You better start crying legitimately because you're in danger. This third effect is mentioned. Bhagavan Nishta Chavaka Vastwantara Bhinivesha. So becoming absorbed in objects that erode your Bhagavat Nishta. And examples are given, like, so many sense objects are there. Another example is given like degrees. Like college degrees and so on. I really appreciated that one. Because we've seen it also,
What's the example? I didn't think of that.
The college degrees, people being absorbed in objects that erode Bhagavad Nishta.
Okay.
So you lose your Bhagavad Nishta because you're learning this thing and that thing, and so much concept coming in the mind. And your Sambandha Gyan is not that strong, you get bewildered, and then
You get some Gyan and some other thing.
and you get Sambandha Gyan and some other thing.
And now all of a sudden,
Yeah.
those are the principles you look at bhakti with.
Dangerous thing. Gyane Prayasamudapasha Namanta Eva. Because Gyan Prayas is said to be Shah Bhakti Vinashati, right? The 6 things that destroy bhakti, and one of them is prayasa, right?
Yeah.
And one of the types of prayasa is Gyan Prayas. Karma Prayas is there, Gyan Prayas is there. Thakur Bhadino Thakur mentions a few other ones like Mukti Prayas, Chitta Prayas, so many prayasas are there.
5, 6 hour and day or so many different types.
Yeah, Gyan Prayas is one of them though. Give it up. So there's a third effect. Getting absorbed in objects that erode bhakti or Bhagavad Nishta. Then bhakti shaitilya, slacking in bhakti. First it starts off with like, all right, I'll make up these 2 rounds tomorrow. I'll make up these 4 rounds tomorrow. I'll make up these 8 rounds tomorrow. I'll make up
I'm gonna
these
start
12
chanting
rounds.
again soon.
I will start chanting again soon.
Soon.
And your bhakti just slackening. I'll go and associate with devotees later. And never is coming. There's been some offenses been made now. This effect is coming. And this one, bhaktyadi kritabhimanitam, getting the pride from your bhakti, doing bhakti and becoming offensive. This one is particularly dangerous because then it leads to other sorts of offenses to Vaishnavas. When you're very proud of your bhakti, this is not meant to point out, but like, for example, just saying, I've seen it at least. Like book distributors for me are just like a good example. I'm sorry, I just have to say this. I've seen it for so many years.
Yeah.
Book distributors get super puffed up and they become very offensive to Vaishnavas and then they fall. I remember I was never into book distribution. I did it for about close to 8 years. And I'll never forget going to LA, getting picked up by the boys at LAX when they were just ending book distribution. And I got in the car and I was sitting in the middle of this like 15-seater car. So they were like surrounding me on all sides. And then, we pulled off, it was kind of quiet. And it was like, how are you going, Prabhu? So you're from Chicago, yes. So what service do you do, Prabhu? And you had to give the right answer.
I distribute books.
Luckily, I distribute books. And then everyone started talking, they were like, Haribo. Like now it was
everybody else's BS.
Yeah, and then they started telling me like that. We're book distributors are above the GBC. We're this is the highest service. You can this, that, and the other. And I was just like not different. I mean, I was of course pretending because I was scared they might throw me out on the curb, dude. I was like, yeah. But internally I was like, oh, these people are ghetto, dude. I'm not having anything to do with them. I didn't want to even associate with them. And I was such a new devotee. I was literally, I think I was definitely less than 2 years in the movement. And I was like, I don't want that. I don't want to think that I'm better than the GBC or that I'm better than anyone. So that's one example. It was probably not the best example. I'm not trying to be overly critical. It's not true of all book distributors. It's just something that I've seen in my time in Krishna consciousness, like up until this point.
It's a common trend with the van life in that particular era.
Yeah. That particular era, this era also.
I mean, now it's quite a lot weaker.
It's a lot weaker.
The sentiment is there, but it's a lot less like tangible.
There's only maybe 4 vans in the US.
Yeah, when they were 15, it was a lot more tangible.
So these are the 5 effects. If you see these effects, some apparatus there. That's what we were mentioning when we were at a retreat just recently. And just like looking at the hardness of the heart, that is also the ability to not cry. Even you make some transgression, you don't feel repentant, or you don't feel that repentant, you're like, sorry. Yeah. That's, some apparatus there. Okay, so we're finished here. So anyway, non-apparatus may have been committed unconsciously or long ago or recently, but they are inferred by their effects. They may have been committed unconsciously long ago or recently, but they are inferred by their effects. By constant chanting of the holy name, Nishta appears in devotion, and gradually those apparatus are nullified. If one commits apparatus consciously, however, then he has to adopt specific means for their nullification. So now he's going to go into describing the different apparatus one by one, and then this means apparatus that are done consciously. If they're done unconsciously, you just keep chanting rigorously, then Nishta will come. But when they're done consciously, as is often the case, then there's specific anecdotes. So we'll go over those anecdotes. So we'll stop there. Looks like there's some questions here. Isn't the attachment, raga, aversion, dvesha, is mind's stimulation and inhibition to go or not go for previously experienced situation, respectively? Okay. And that is dushkriti anartha. Okay. So what is sukriti? So that was already answered. Because Shri Vishnu is giving sukriti uta anartha like a separate category. But he says, some say that this is also the kleshas. Yeah. So that also makes sense because the kleshas affect both the pious and the impious. So that we already mentioned in class, right? Okay, right. So Shangopi says 1,728 names if we do 16 rounds. I was excited to hear 25,000, but I thought it's not possible. I can't do so much. So I recalculated.
How many? That's mantras. Right?
Yeah, mantras.
728 mantras. 25,000 names.
Yeah. So. I'm looking at a private note. So the private note says, I went to a retreat, and at a retreat, lots of transformation happens. I registered and walked in single, but walked out with a potential life partner. Isn't that a big transformation?
Is it working?
Y'all are hilarious. if saber apparatus is not nullified, how does that manifest, fructify? Is it the same as if you did naparat? Well, if it's not nullified, that means you're doing naparat. Because it will be nullified by your bhajan. That's what he's saying. If you do constantly your Chinese stutis, doing nam japa, doing Vaishnav seva, so many things, so it will be nullified. So if it is not nullified, it becomes naparat. Then we already heard 5 effects of naparat. So this will be the effect: slackening of bhakti, crookedness, pride in your bhakti, etc. We heard 5 effects here. Another question, making it all the way in karma yoga would mean what? You are able to move? No, so in these rites, there's a beginning and end. So you have to complete it to the very end of the rite with all things intact.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you don't get the results. And if it's not intact, you can get opposite results also. So that is what that meant. And if you don't make it all the way, how is it a waste? Yeah, it's a waste. You don't get the results, so it's a waste. That's what, in material affairs, it was kind of like that. Just like in New York, people go on dates. Devotees also, they are on the dating apps. I talk to many friends that are all over dating applications. So they go on many dates and they tell me about their dates also.
Dating apps or Tinder?
That's the dating app.
Is that a dating app?
Well,
That's-
we're gonna say dating app, like some of these apps, you can call them hookup apps because that's what the culture is turned into. But our devotees have a little bit of, they're practitioners. So they're going on dates. They're not just trying to hook up. At least they don't tell me that part. So I'm gonna give the benefit of the doubt and just say they're going on dates. And then the date is terrible. So it's like a waste of time. You literally just wasted time. It doesn't get completed, right? The completion will be, the consummation will be marriage if you're pious.
Yeah.
Of course, in the impious culture, the consummation is a little bit different. But, having to accrue pious credits from, the idea here is that you wanted to produce a result from the karmic activity. So that result is not coming. And so it is like a wasted time. That was the idea here. But here, because the context of this discussion is its relation to bhakti, or how bhakti and karma are different. So in bhakti, the bhakti vasanas are very nice. They will lead to transcendence. But in karma, the karma vasanas are not very nice. Okay, now you have the intention to do pious activity, but piety also leads to sin. That's the fun about the material world, actually. That's why in Gaudiya Vaishnavism, piety is also not considered very important, because in pious culture, sin is also happening a lot because of the nature of piety. For example, we told this story of Haridas Thakur. He was getting worshipped by all the brahmanas. So the one other brahmana was there getting affected by that. I'm such a pious person. I'm doing all the things I'm supposed to do nicely. And this worship is meant for me. Namo Brahmanya Devaya Gobramana Hitaya Cha. So he sees Haridas Thakur is getting the worship meant for him. So then, because in one sense, he's correct. Haridas Thakur is as far as he can see, some fallen lecture type. How is he getting worship? Just making some show of ecstasy. I mean, when people are so foolish, I will also get the word. He starts dancing. You worship me. I'm a Brahmana. I'm a proper object of respect. And then the Ananta Shesh, because Ananta Shesh was channeling that snake charmer guy. So Ananta Shesh, he knows everything. So he just took the stick and just started beating that guy. So his piety became his downfall. And there's so many stories like this. Piety is it's like you see it with puritanical religious cultures. They're so pious. They want to be pious to such a strict. They end up doing so many sinful activities in the name of piety, in the name of protecting the pious culture. So piety is not very. My point here, karma vasanas are not very important. That's my point. The vasanas of piety are not very. Well, they get secretive, and that's not very important. Bhakti vasanas, those are very nice. Those are very important. Karma vasanas are not very important. So that's what, anyway, the context is there is that these rites have to be completed to the end, otherwise you don't get the results. So it's like wasted time. So you said, but they get the karma. That is not appreciated.
Anyways, it's a waste of time.
Anyway, it's a waste. Just like in the 6th canto of Ajamil Lila when it's first told. So Shukadeva Goswami is testing Parikshit Maharaj, right? So Parashat Maharaj wants to know how you can be saved from going to hell, because he just heard chapter 26 of 5th canto, the hellish chapter. All the hells there. You read that chapter? It's a very interesting chapter. So he wants to say, how can living just be saved from that? So first answer Shukadeva is in terms of karma mark. Then you do sin, you do the prayaschitta, right? And then Parashat Maharaj says it's like elephant bath. So he rejects it. He rejects it as valuable, even though it's pious. He rejects it as valuable. But later on, when he hears about Ajamil continuing to commit sin after chanting Nam, he doesn't reject that. He doesn't. Our charts specifically bring this up. I think in the same commentary that we were mentioning earlier today. So he doesn't say what that is like elephant bath. That he chanted Nam, still he was doing sin. That is like, he doesn't say it there, but he said it in relationship to the karma mark. So that means they're in two different categories. Karma vasanas are not appreciated by Gaudiya Vaishnavism. That's why devotees be on and on and on about people's piety. That's because devotee has soft nature. So they can see even the tiniest good quality, magnify it. You know that commentary from 4th canto where Sati is chastising Daksha, her father. So he's talking about the nature of the sadhus. So if you general sadhu, mahat was used, then they will see how you have a bad quality, but how it can be used for good. Then you're called as a mahat. If you're a mahat tara, more mahat, then you'll see good and bad, but you'll accept the good. And if you are a mahat tama, most mahat, topmost guy, then you'll see even the tiniest good quality, you will magnify it. Not mahatama. So which type of, so then the opposite side is asadu, asadutara, asudutama. So the asadu, he sees a good quality, how it can be used for bad.
He's got that, but he's gonna
exploit and
he's a focus dude.
And then asadutara, more sadhu, he'll see the good and the bad, but he'll accept the bad. And then the asadutama, topmost asadu guy, he sees the tiniest little fault and boom, he'll magnify it, write some article, put it on the internet. So I forgot why I brought that particular, what was I saying there? Anyway.
Talking about karma vasanas. And you were talking about the vision of the devotee.
Yeah, so a vision of devotee is like this. Mahatma specifically, they see some small, they magnify. So you see how devotees be glorifying these people. They're actually rascals, many of them. But devotee is such soft nature. He sees some good quality in that person, he magnifies it. And by the influence of that Vaishnava, he may also end up becoming Vaishnava. But actually, by Tatashtra Vichar, he is a rascal. By Tatashtra Vichar, he's definitely a rascal. And he has no good qualities. That's what Harava Bhaktasha Kuto Mahaguna Shastra is telling. He has no good qualities. So, but then afterwards we get confused because we see how this great Vaishnava is appreciating this guy. Then we start thinking piety is so valuable. He must have good, so pious guy.
Maybe I should just have the same thing.
Yeah, but okay, he may be pious. That is okay for him. There's no fault in that. There's not a fault. That's what we're trying to say. But that's okay. I'm saying you're not going to make a judgment or get preoccupied in that. But he has the fault of not being a bhakta. Harava bhakta. What is Harava bhaktasha kuto mahaguna? Where is his good quality? When he doesn't have a yasya bhakti bhagavati kinchana, he doesn't have a kinchan bhakti, uttam bhakti. So where is his good quality? That's Tatashtra Vichar. Now we're speaking Tatashtra Vichar. When we're talking about interaction, that is another thing, because that's usually you're giving class about a Tatashtra Vichar point, and everyone's taking it on like how you're applying it subjectively. Yeah, exactly. We're not talking about you go up to them and say, you have no good qualities, you're a fool and rascal. No, we're talking Tatashtra Vichar. This is how Bhagavatam is presenting the landscape of reality. And Tatashtra Vichar. So take it in that way. So in that way, the person is a rascal. But as far as the soft-hearted nature of a devotee, he may see some small good quality. And he may magnify all of this thing, that thing. But we shouldn't become confused that they are, that piety is such a great thing. No. Piety is also not a great thing.
It's kind of like Vaishnava humility. And great Vaishnavas will say, no, I'm actually like this. And I'm actually, because they see themselves as fallen.
Right.
And then if you don't really know that that's the way they're going to talk about themselves, right? Oh, maybe he's right.
Yeah, maybe he is fallen, right?
Yeah.
Right, because you don't understand. Yeah, exactly.
You're not supposed to necessarily trust that. as
Exactly.
tattva.
Right.
And it's
That's a
in
good comparison. Very nice. Yeah. All right, a few more questions here. And also foster the sense of detachment, nishkam karma. Even if I have not perfected nishkam karma, you have made steps toward it, so it is an improvement. Like I said, for devotees subjectively, they may think in that way. There's no problem. From Tatasha Vichar, if you're not a devotee, you're a rascal. It's very simple. There's no complication. Dharma projita kaita vatra paramo nirmasanam satam. Opening statement of the Bhagavatam. All Kaitava Dharma is being kicked out means that it's going to be criticized.
Yeah.
What is Kaitava Dharma? Anything that is not Shuddha Bhakti is called as Kaitava Dharma. So that is our Tatasha Vichar consideration. As far as how you interact with people, or you saw it's very nice. They're doing at least they're doing piety, very nice. At least they're doing Gyan. That is also, at least something is going on. You may say like that, some Vaishnava will say like that, may think like that. And it's probably good for neophytes to think like that, because we're very close to these people anyway, in terms of like consciousness in one sense.
Yeah.
So it may be helpful for us to think like that. But we're talking to Tasha Vichar. And when Bhagavatam is speaking, and when acharyas are just plainly representing Bhagavatam, then this is how they speak. They're rascal. Okay, so it sounds like all types of aparad, guru seva, not all result in the 5 types of symptoms. Yes. What is prayasa? Prayasa means endeavor, right? We translate over endeavor. So this prayasa means karma prayasa is the common one, but there's so many other types. Gyan prayasas there, mukti prayasa. You have to do a lot of endeavor for that, especially if you don't want to use bhakti and you still don't get any result. You never get a result, so you really over endeavoring there for nothing. And tirtha prayas is Thakur talks about tirtha prayas. I want to see this place and that place and the other place and the other place and the other one. I want to take pictures and see the rivers and do this and do that. And, go to see sadhus and hear from them. Yeah, tirtha buddhi salilena kari chitra nesha abhigeshu saiva gokara. So you were like an ass, bro. Going here, there. That's tirtha prayas. So this is fine. Okay, but if you chant holy name offensive, does it nullify separate? No. All right, Agape, you can ask one, and then we'll stop there. If you want to still ask the question.
So I asked you in the past about like why do we only pay attention to certain seva aparads generally in the temple, and the answer that was given, and also like the way that the nectar devotion is presented is, nam aparad is more important than seva aparad, and if we take shelter of the holy names, then the Lord doesn't take offense to offenses at his
and after right here
lotus feet.
Today also, right?
Yeah, but wasn't a point also made that if we know that something isn't a seva aparad, but we continue to do it, counting on the strength of the holy names, that is considered nam aparad, because you're committing a sin of the soul per se on the strength of the holy names.
Say that again. Did you hear that?
Yeah,
what is
he's
that?
basically saying like if we transgress it on purpose, then it's nama, right?
Yes.
I think the distinction is transgression versus outright neglect. If I decide like I'm not gonna do that,
Right.
versus like, oh, I'm gonna do it badly, or I'm gonna I think maybe
seva aparad is different from neglect.
Yeah, can you ask your question in one sentence or two at the most?
Yeah, let me see it. So let me put it this way. The analogy that was given of running with your eyes closed because you know what angas are important and you're not worried about the other ones. Can the same thing be applied to seva aparad? Like, is that same concept there?
I don't think so. From what we were hearing here, maybe if y'all heard it differently from what I was hearing, devotees are following this. They're not doing seva aparads, which means they don't go into temples on a palanquin. They don't wear shoes in the temple room. They don't walk in trying to look like royalty and doing this, that, and the other. And it seems like there's a sense that they're not consciously neglecting the seva. What's the opposite of seva aparad? Deity seva.
Yeah, just
Deity seva might be the best way to put
they're
it.
just angas, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're not consciously neglecting those, but they may unconsciously not follow them. Because there's so many seva aparats are there. There's so many. So you may unconsciously not follow them, but they will not consciously not follow them. Like certain things, specifically like going to the temple room in a palanquin or wearing shoes and so on.
There's a difference between transgression and neglect.
Yeah, there's a
Like,
difference
not
between
doing something doesn't mean doing the opposite.
right. So yeah, there's a Ujjwal is here with me. He was making that point. Is there a difference between negligence and transgression? You know, you're just when you're negligence and well, the word negligence is not a good word though, right? You should not doing something.
I'm just using that because you said
Yeah.
it
Yeah,
earlier.
not doing
Not
something. You're just not performing something.
Like not going to temple.
Yeah, like not going to the temple, right?
Yeah,
Exactly.
That's not abroad.
Right.
And the specific point was because you're running enthusiastically towards some
Yeah.
more inner limb.
Yeah.
So it's like
That's the other side, exactly. The other side of this is the running part. So running, as we mentioned in charge is saying, this running means the enthusiasm for like basically Navavida Bhakti, some more internal limb. So in that absorption, you're consciously not performing other angas of bhakti, which may also be valuable and even important, but you're consciously not doing them because you're absorbed in these other angas. That was how we were hearing the presentation, at least just now.
Right, that analogy was used for the yangas. So I was wondering if we could apply that also to this aparad, because it seems to me that it's not like just people don't remember, like is the reason why certain seva aparads are followed and others aren't, but it seems more like, I don't know, like a convenience for the sake of preaching type of thing. Because I feel like a lot of devotees do know, like a lot of the seva aparads, like that they're.
There's 128. I promise you, I don't know more than 10.
I'm not saying all of them, but like I'm just saying, like any devotees read the Nectar Devotion. If you read at least a couple that sounded strange or funny to you, because like you see people breaking it all the time, like that's always going to be in your head. So it's not like the whole like consciously versus unconsciously doing it. I feel like there is like a reason why we choose like certain ones to follow and certain ones not to follow. That I was just curious if that's applicable.
Yeah, thinking about it somewhat practically, the ones we choose to follow are the ones we remember, basically. And then also Seva Aparad, I think precisely Seva Aparad refers to transgressions against the deity worship. Yeah. So it's like when you're actually like worshiping the deity. So even this like farting thing, I actually realized, I would say realize, because when I did deity worship, then you realize you're like right next to the deity, you're doing all sorts of, so don't pass air because you're worshiping the deity.
Yeah.
But you're like in the middle of the temple room, and you're like in kirtan or something. Sometimes the air is building up, you're jumping up and down, and you might rip one. It's not really a seva aparad,
My job is gonna be terrible.
Yeah, it's not really seva aparad. So I think thinking somewhat practically, the seva aparads that get avoided are the ones that you remember consciously. And so it's not like you're choosing to follow some and not choosing. I think it's just the ones you remember. And a lot of them are like culturally, how you say culturally, not nourished, but like
infused in the culture.
There's like, it's like they're like culturally, they're like enveloped in a certain culture. For example, the reason no one walks into the temple room in palanquin because it's just not the culture. So you won't even think to do certain things because of a culture that surrounds like temple life. Exactly. It'd be a egregious opera. No one walks into the temple room with their shoes on because it's a. Wait, you walk in with a palanquin and royalty clothes,
in blue
and red royalty
we do that.
So there's a certain culture around, temple life and temple worship that you become acquainted with even by osmosis. And so you're consciously avoiding seva aparads because it's just a culture that surrounds it also that kind of supports that. And as far as like consciously following certain things and not certain other things in the seva aparad, I don't think it happens in seva aparads. That's what I'm saying. That's why I feel like he brought up as a separate point. They're saying that if you're like consciously not avoiding a seva aparat, then you're like an animal. You're like constantly committing offenses. So it is like an animal. That's why he brought it up. So basically there's a culture that supports how you exist around the deity, how you exist around the temple. And so you end up by osmosis being pretty much aware of a lot of these sort of angas of seva for the deity. Even if you're not, like you can't precisely know it, you basically know it. And so if you're consciously neglecting to avoid one of those seva aparats, then yeah, you're like an animal. You're just committing an offense to Hari. Yeah. That's why I feel like he's given it like a slight separate. He gave it a few separate sentences, making this particular point.
Okay, I appreciate this conversation because it always bothers me, like the answer of, oh, you know, just depend on the shelter of the holy names and you're fine, because that really seems like an offense, you know, like continuing to do something.
The way he's saying it, it does sound like it's like, oh, just turn them into non-opera.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Ujjwala is saying, Ujjwala agrees with you. He's saying the way that you're saying it sounds like just be a non-operati.
And we do get
Exactly.
that. A lot of times that's like a super distilled two-dimensional message. Like, you don't even really have to think about these.
Right.
Like, not exactly.
Yeah, we could probably temper that discussion a little bit more, you know, carefully we could articulate it. But the basic point is there is a culture around existing around the deity. So even by osmosis, even an ignorant person comes to follow most of those seva angas. Even by, I remember when Luke first came to the temple, Luke around now, but Dr. Luke at the time, he wasn't about to Luke, he was just visiting the temple. And I remember, he was just Luke. Yeah, not Dr. Luke, he was just Luke. And I remember him being like, he participated very heartedly in like the kirtan, and then when all the devotees offered the obeisances, he also offered the obeisances. And he was already starting to pick up some of the cultural things just by osmosis, like, oh, this is how you exist in this culture.
Yeah.
And so like children, they follow a lot of things, but they're not going to be consciously able to point out that this is an anga of seva to the deity, and therefore it should not be. They're just by osmosis they're doing. So you have a culture that supports that. Yeah. And so if you're consciously avoiding to follow that, that means you're an animal, bro. You're just committing offense to Hari. Like, you know, you shouldn't do that. Yeah. Like, you know, it's not the culture and everything. So, but here is sometimes some seva aparats do happen incidentally in the course of existence, because you may not be consciously aware of all of them. There are quite a few of them. So in that case, because you're chanting the holy name, those are nullified. But again, you're not consciously neglecting to avoid it. You're just kind of not aware of it. You've done it. Yeah. And so, but you're also doing stuti, also chanting nam, and so that gets nullified. It's not taken as a, you know, Hari is, after all, Krishna is a person. It's not like a mechanical thing. Krishna is a person, so he can see what's going on in the heart. Mm-hmm. Oh, you purposely neglected to avoid that because of convenience. You know, you chose efficiency over responsibility. So, bro, that ain't cool. That's not personal. It's not personal.
Yeah, that's interesting. You get hung up on transgressions, not technicalities.
Right.
For the karma mark, it's technicalities.
Right.
But here it's like Krishna knows if it's a transgression.
Right.
And you kind of also know.
You kind of also know if it's a transgression, right?
I remember David was saying that, like with Vaishnava Prabhu, when we were talking at the retreat. He was like, I know, like almost immediately. And then if I get a reaction, oh man, you know, immediately it's like, oh, I shouldn't have done that. Yeah. Why did I say that? I know this is.
That was Kishore. He said that. Oh, he also said it. Okay.
But yeah, you.
Didn't I say that?
Yeah, the transgression versus the technicality thing.
All right, fam, we'll pause for now. Hari Om Tat Sat, thanks a lot. But almost all of us are chanting offensively, so stop it. So we're not nullifying aparats. Therefore, Madhurya Kadambini is going to give an elaboration on this, so we can work on this problem. Okay. Shri Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur ki jai, Shri Prabhupada ki jai.
Thank you